Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, October the 27th, 2021. As I like to say, social media was invented to drive women crazy, or crazier, as the case might be. And I'm going to start tonight by discussing TikTok, which is the Chinese spy app wildly popular amongst our young people. This is a piece by Thomas Buckley in AmericanThinker.com. It's called The TikTok Tic and the Politicization of Medical Care. How far has the influence of influencers gone? Very far gone, it seems. Recently, a new phenomenon has cropped up, that of people, mostly teen girls, developing various tics akin to Tourette's syndrome after watching people on TikTok who actually have or claim to have the malady. Interestingly, the reaction to the situation has been surprisingly reasonable and very unlike the reaction to another trend that is also quite possibly linked to social media, the recent surge in claims of gender dysphoria. This is not the first time social contagion situations involving young women and men, but to a far lesser extent, have arisen. From the Salem witch trials to more recent episodes in upstate New York, again a movement disorder that spread through a relatively limited locale, to the hiccuping girls of Danvers, Massachusetts, only a few years ago, incidents of social contagion or mass psychogenic illness or mimeticism, various names are used, have been widely documented. Previous cases have been limited in geographical scope, but social media has now turned somewhere into everywhere, and like a gain-of-function research, whether intentionally or not, you can now put one thing into one end of the Twitterverse and come out with something incredibly damaging on the other end. Most of the incidents seem to involve young women. It's a matter of some debate exactly why this is so, but teenage girls' social structure is without question fertile ground for this kind of issue, quite possibly out of an evolutionary instinctual urge to band together for safety from potential predators, i.e. whether human or animal, young women tend to cluster. This is not a bad thing. There is safety in numbers. But this cluster effect can leave an opening for a herd mentality to blossom. From valley girl speak to bangs or no bangs, to scrunchies to mean girl cliques, trends and fashions tend to burn through teenage girls with speed and ferocity. Obviously, yes, all teens are susceptible. You can almost always find a group of boys who are aficionados of mullets, Marlboros, and muscle cars in the high school parking lot. Movement disorders are comparatively rare in girls, doctors say, hence the initial surprise. After some discussion and investigation, it was noted that many girls were avid TikTok viewers. The current theory is that Tourette's videos, combined to an extent with individual underlying anxiety issues and the acute psychological stress so many children and teens have been subjected to during the pandemic, are at the heart of the matter. So what are doctors telling worried parents to do about the TikTok tics? Basically, tell the kids to put down the phone, get trusted professional help, minimize its impact by keeping everything else as regular as possible, and don't overreact, don't feed into it. This calm approach can be taken further. In the Danvers hiccups case, state health officials who investigated the matter seemed to come to a social contagion causal conclusion, but decided not to release that to the public because the social stigma could then be attached to the sufferers. No one wants to think they could ever fall prey to such nonsense, might cause lasting harm. They essentially just let it drop. What the doctors in this situation are not doing is prescribing 2 packs of Camel every day to the girls, although nicotine has been shown to have significant ameliorative effects on the symptoms of Tourette's. Giving cigarettes to kids would clearly be crazy. I don't know about that. It's a lot safer than a lot of things they do these days. Smoking causes long-term damage, and prescribing a harmful permanent solution to what is almost assuredly a short-term issue is never a good idea. Any doctor who did so would be deservedly drummed out of the profession. Yes, this doesn't quite tally with the paragraph, 2 paragraphs down. So then why are doctors right now prescribing harmful drugs and performing life-altering surgeries on girls who just decided they were born in the wrong body? The environment around the sudden onset Tourette sufferers is disturbingly close to that surrounding the recent explosion in gender dysphoria claims made by young women. Noted in Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, The Trends Gender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, a very significant number of the girls now requesting gender transition treatment follow a similar pattern. In both situations, the same facts are present, underlying but usually mild psychological issues, combined with the onset of teendom and the stresses that brings, a devotion to social media, and quite possibly a desire for affection or the desire to fit in by standing out. But again, only gender dysphoria is treated unquestioningly as permanent, real, and requiring radical and immediate intervention to solve. Gender transition clinics and their advocates in government and the media are not saying don't feed into it. Instead, they are intentionally gorging it, either for financial gain, a socio-political advantage, or as basic a desire to be one of the cool kids in their own profession. And then there are the true believer physicians who think that drugging and chopping up a vulnerable teenage girl, quite possibly against the wishes of her parents and or even without their knowledge, is a good idea. One wonders how many of these physicians would react if they were told to prescribe cigarettes to social contagious tics. It seems the social media reaction to the recent spate of stories, Buckley continues, on the tic issue has mostly been reasonable, along the lines of, that's odd, too bad for these girls, glad to hear it's most likely a passing phase, maybe we should do something about TikTok. Good thing the experts are putting this into perspective and handling it with proper and careful treatment so they can get back to their normal lives, etc. It does not appear that there has been a social media deluge of activists demanding that medical professionals prescribe the cigarettes to handle the issue, as there probably has been with activists demanding that medical professionals prescribe hormones and surgery. It's just wrong to deny unequivocally the possibility, despite comparable situations of mass hysteria, that the recent surge in gender dysphoria cases claims could be in any way influenced by social media, peer issues, etc. It also ignores the scientific method and permanently and incomprehensibly damages teens going through one of the most difficult parts of life. Actual Tourette's is real, about 0.5% of children have it. Actual gender dysphoria is real, about 1 in 10,000 teens have it. There is no denying that both issues deserve intelligent, compassionate attention. But unlike the situation with tics, even mentioning the possibility that social media and other non-individual inherent factors has conceivably played a role in the enormous rise in cases is as forbidden to discuss as was the COVID lab leak hypothesis just a few months ago. It gets better, seems to be the tack medical professionals are taking with the tic issue, and that's good. It gets better is also a positive and common trope in the alphabet people community when discussing the teen years. But what if the instantaneous intervention in drugs and surgery makes it impossible for girls eventually to get better? Then everything gets worse. And again, this is a piece by Thomas Buckley at AmericanThinker.com. I'd mentioned Christopher Lasch had written as far back as 1977 about the what he considered to be the malign effects of so-called child-centered parenting, that it leads to many unfortunate personality traits, including this thirst for authenticity. And the thirst for authenticity is commonly displayed by doing what everyone else does, whether it is getting tattoos, getting piercings, shaving one half of your head and dyeing the other half blue or green, or developing tics after watching TikTok videos. I think a large part of this has to do with the fact that it seems that in North America, when children reach the age of about 10, their parents decide that they shouldn't really be raising them anymore. I don't know, it's too time-consuming, too embarrassing, or whatever. So instead, children from the age of 10 are increasingly socialized, not by their parents, but by their peers, and worse still, by the media. As far as TikTok goes, I don't know, one could suggest that people, not both men and women, not be allowed to access social media until they turn, 18, 21, or even 25. As again, as I mentioned earlier, Before social media, before the internet, girls and women were competing with a rather small set of people. Siblings, say, school mates, work mates, friends, etc. And now social media forces women to compete with the entire female population of the world, which means that in some respect they will always be found wanting. And this is a very bad thing. This goes hand in hand with the medicalization of everything in life now. Alex Berenson released a chapter of his upcoming book, Pandemia, on his Substack page, and he has a chapter devoted to so-called long COVID, which Berenson concludes does not exist, which is my opinion as well. But of course, women start, and it is almost always women who start talking about suffering from the effects of long COVID, for weeks or months or perhaps permanently. And other women see this and, oh, yes, I was feeling kind of tired today, kind of achy, so I must have long COVID too. You know, Berenson mentions restless leg syndrome in this chapter, and I have restless leg syndrome, and I was amused a few years ago to discover that this is now considered a mental illness, just as nail biting is now considered a mental illness. I used to bite my nails. I managed to cure myself of this habit just a few years ago. As far as restless leg syndrome goes, I remember back in the 70s, I was at this meeting of the executive of my union. I was on the provincial executive, and I'd been sitting next to a woman from about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was now, I don't know, about 3:30 in the afternoon. And suddenly she turned her head to me and shouted, "Stop it!" I practically jumped out of my chair. What's wrong? And she pointed down, "Your leg. Stop moving your leg," which I did, because I was terrified of what her next move was going to be after shouting at me. But no, apparently everything that people do now is a symptom of mental illness, and mental illness has become popular now. Everyone, or every young person, seemingly wants to be neurodivergent, as the kids like to say these days, and that is very, very bad. Nobody wants to be normal anymore, because normal is bad. Actually, normal is actually good. One doesn't want to stand out from everybody in many different ways. It makes it difficult for people to get along with one another. And as always, it's time to bring back stigma, just as it's time to bring back bullying. I mean, stigma and bullying can go too far, but they tend to keep people, especially young people, on the straight and narrow. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Head McNeck and Run Palpicasso 88. Urban Planner Buddy, hello to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Thank you for your valiant service. No Sleep, Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania says TikTok is Havana syndrome for Zoomers. Urban Planner says chronic meme disorder. Okay. Hello to Chokokin 666 and Gamyun. Tobacco is better than SSRIs when you exercise in the sun and don't eat junk food every day, says No Sleep. I remember reading, I think it was an opinion piece in the Washington Post some years ago, say, that to adults now, their children smoking tobacco, marijuana is different for some reason. Their teens smoking tobacco was the worst thing that they could do. And the op-ed columnist, suggested that there are actually many things that teenagers do nowadays that are objectively worse for them than smoking. For instance, I don't know, taking nude pictures of themselves in the bathroom and then sending it to random boys on the off chance that some boy might like them. People take this for granted now. It's considered normal behavior, but it's objectively deranged. Hello to John S. and Holly the cook, who says those doctors cutting up teens should end up in a jail. Hello to Yo Mama. Bullring in septum, says Chogoken666. Yes, I have noticed, and this is just in the last, 3 months, that the septum ring has now become like the tramp stamp. It is not quite de rigueur, but it is almost there. Kevin, how do you read these things without rage and despondency? Well, the philosopher takes the world as it is, not as he would like it to be. Although, if you're looking for material for rage or despondency, this show is going to be full of this. Bring back bullying. Sam Biddle's one good take. What's his name? Sam? $1 Million Extreme. He had a funny bit on his short-lived TV show about bullying being reintroduced into schools. Gamian says, I get under direct sun every morning for a few minutes. It's life-giving. Libs have their own unholy trinity of unsafety, smoking, speeding, and egg slunking, whatever that last one might be. Oh, another thing that women love to claim is that they have all been sexually abused or sexually assaulted at some time in their lives. And the latest is Huma Abedin, who is a famous person for reasons that escape me. She has clearly an unhealthy relationship with Hillary Clinton, who she first met when she was working for her when Clinton was in her, 50s? And she said that Hillary Clinton was so beautiful. She said this publicly, which suggests an unhealthy sexual attraction. Abedin, of course, was married to Anthony Weiner, clearly one of the strangest and phoniest marriages in American history. Huma Abedin writes in, this is from Blake Montgomery at the Daily Beast. Huma Abedin writes in her forthcoming book that a U.S. senator sexually assaulted her in her 20s, kissing her unprompted and forcing his tongue in her mouth as the two conversed in his apartment. Did she slap him across the face? I mean, assuming this actually happened. Did she slap him across the face? If not, why not? The longtime aide to Hillary Clinton, now 45, detailed the incident in her memoir, Both, and, sounds classy, A Life in Many Words, set to be published next week, according to an excerpt obtained by The Guardian. Abedin withheld details of the senator's identity, including his party affiliation, whether he is still in Congress, and which state he represented. According to Abedin's account, she and the senator met at a dinner attended by several other lawmakers and their aides in Washington, D.C., though not Clinton, who was New York Senator and Abedin's boss from 2001 until 2009. Following the meal, Abedin took a walk with the senator, who invited her into his apartment for coffee, and she wrote, told me to make myself comfortable on the couch. Again, assuming this happened, could she not see where this was going? Then, in an instant, it all changed. He plopped down to my right, put his left arm around my shoulder and kissed me, pushing his tongue into my mouth, pressing me back on the sofa, she writes. Abedin, who said she was so utterly shocked, pushed the senator away. Her resistance surprised him, and he apologized, saying he had misread the situation and wanting to make up without this ending badly, she said. Abedin wrote, then I said something only the 20-something version of me would have come up with, I am so sorry, and walked out, trying to appear as nonchalant as possible. A few days later, the two ran into each other on Capitol Hill, and the senator asked if they could still be friends. Clinton intervened in the exchange as if she knew I needed rescuing, even though I told her nothing about that night, according to Abedin. It's not clear if Abedin ever told Clinton about the alleged assault. Abedin said she buried the incident until sexual assault allegations against future Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh emerged in 2018. How very convenient. Specifically, Abedin wrote, it was Professor Christine Blasey Ford being accused of conveniently remembering the alleged attack against her that dredged up Abedin's memory of her own alleged assault. Another excerpt from Abedin's memoir, published last week in Vogue. Do the readers of Vogue really want to hear about Huma Abedin's sex life? Dealt with the high-profile implosion of her then-husband and New York Congressman Anthony Weiner's political career after he tweeted a nearly naked photo and then pleaded guilty to sexting a minor. He was sentenced to 21 months in prison in 2017 and released after serving 18. She filed for divorce from Weiner following his conviction, but withdrew the case the next year. The two have a 6-year-old son. And then, just like that, life as I knew it was officially over. It's true, he said. I sent the picture. I felt something explode inside my chest. And suddenly, it was hard to breathe. I was simultaneously filled with rage and stunned to my core. She wrote of the aftermath of Weiner scandals. This breathless autobiographical style used to be mocked in Private Eye magazine as the author being Sylvie Crin after the shampoo. And we have another, how shall I say, barely credible story of this type. This is by Elise von Scheel at CBC News. A former Alberta legislature staff member is suing the Premier's office, saying she suffered from a toxic workplace culture and was fired as retribution for speaking out about the problems she says she saw there. The allegations in Aurelia Kimmel's lawsuit include sexual harassment and heavy drinking by ministers and staff in legislature offices, as well as claims that senior staff in the Premier's office fabricated rumors about her, contributing to her termination. CBC News has obtained a copy of the legal document. None of the allegations have been proven in court. Kimmel worked as the chief of staff to the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation from August 2020 until she was fired in February 2021. She had worked with Jason Kenney's UCP government since May 2019. Kenney himself is not named in the suit. The statement of claim says that in mid-October 2020, Kimmel found Agriculture and Forestry Minister Devin Dreeshen drinking with a chief of staff in his office. They later turned up in another minister's office where the ministers and staff in attendance appeared to be heavily intoxicated, Kimmel said. Her statement said that during the gathering, she expressed concern about how drunk Dreeshen was and encouraged him to stop drinking. After they left the suite, the lawsuit alleges the minister confronted her about the intervention and aggressively yelled at her to the point where she was in tears and a concerned bystander intervened. Now, okay, buried in the text is something that should be close to the top. Prior to her appointment as chief of staff that year, Kimmel had been in an on and off relationship with Dreeshen. Okay, then. There's a common phrase, a two-word phrase to describe an on and off sexual relationship between a man and a woman, but it is quite crude, and I won't mention it here. Oh, but the story just gets worse and worse for poor Kimmel. 2 days later, another group of staff met for drinks in the Minister of Health's office. That night, Ivan Bernardo, the minister's principal advisor, is alleged to have made a sexually inappropriate comment to one of Kimmel's female staff members. I haven't seen you on this floor before because with a body like that, I would have noticed you, the statement of claim alleges, Bernardo said. Yes, so a woman is now suing the government of Alberta because a political advisor supposedly complimented another woman, not her, but another woman on her body. Oh, the pain, the pain, the pain. And, oh, yes. I mentioned Abigail Schreier and her great book, which I all urge you to read. And, of course, men and women are simply sexual constructs, right? societal constructs, rather. Sexist, they don't really exist. And we see this expressed at Smith College, one of the Seven Sisters colleges. This is by Christina Coulter at the Daily Mail. Woke Smith College student demands prestigious university install tampon and sanitary pad dispensers in all men's bathrooms so those with uteruses can access the products they need. In an opinion piece for women-only Smith College, the Sophian, a student called for sanitary product in all bathrooms on campus for those with uteruses. The student said Smith is sending a message to menstruating students about the lack of care for their well-being by not having pads and tampons in restrooms. The writer claimed that house bathrooms and other public restrooms on campus are not installed with dispensers for students. Yes, you may have heard of this phrase, period poverty, which I'm not making up, which is actually a thing. Rather than adopting a clandestine attitude towards menstruation to cater to cisgender men, the writer says Smith should install dispensers in all bathrooms. Smith should pioneer by taking the radical position of understanding a period as a cycle common to those with uteruses, which requires hygienic care. Golly, really? I never heard of that before. Life is full of surprises. Smith College could not be reached for comment. Perpetually empty menstrual product dispensers in female bathrooms are not uncommon on the ritzy college's campuses, according to students. The college mandated anti-bias training for all staff after a student claimed to be targeted for eating while black when she was kicked out of the cafeteria in 2018. It was determined that there was no bias and that the cafeteria was closed to all students for a summer camp event, but the training continues. And here is another story from the Daily Mail, which of course is the home headquarters of the YOY story. This is really an appalling story. This is by Shannon Thaler and Natasha Anderson from the Mail. Parents and students alike are taking a stand against a Virginia superintendent and school board that was accused of lying to cover up 2 alleged sexual assaults in order to push their pro-transgender policies. These are real sexual assaults, not overhearing a remark made to someone else. Hundreds of residents gathered Tuesday at a Loudoun County Public Schools board meeting. Approximately 120 people signed up to speak at the demonstration, including a group of proclaimed radical feminists and Democrats, and fight for gender-specific spaces. Others protested outside, with many toting placards proclaiming themselves Democrats, leftists, and feminists, outraged by the board's antics. We really want to see the school board rescind the policy. There is absolutely no justifiable reason to have a policy that allows boys into women's bathrooms, Democrat Kara Dansky said, according to the Federalist. It's just not acceptable. It's anti-feminist. It's misogynistic. It's politically regressive. All of the women standing behind me and near me are radical feminists. Most of us are Democrats. We are here because we are on the political left and we stand in support of female-only spaces. Enraged parents cited an email that surfaced last week where Superintendent Scott Ziegler reported an alleged sexual assault in the girls' bathroom. The email, which was sent on May 28th of this year, contradicted a statement Ziegler made the month before when he publicly said that he had no record of bathroom assaults. You were so concerned with pushing race and gender that you sacrificed our children, Patty Hidalgo Menders, president of the Loudoun County GOP Women's Club, said. Students from 3 Loudoun County high schools also participated in the protest by walking out of their classrooms Tuesday morning and chanting, "Loudoun County protects rapists." The walkouts come a day after a juvenile court judge charged the student accused in the May 28th attack at Stonebridge High with sexual assault. A court hearing for the second alleged attack, which is said to have occurred at Broad Run High, is scheduled for next month. Sentencing for both incidents will take place after the hearing. Yes, letting boys into girls' bathrooms. What's the worst that could happen? How long did they think it was going to take before something awful happened? And I've mentioned before the strange, at least to me, phenomenon of people who are non-binary, as they call themselves, changing their names, and you're not allowed to call them by their old names because this is called dead naming. And it's the worst thing that exists in the world. Probably even worse than overhearing a sexual comment or a sexual compliment paid to some other woman in the room. They have to come up with weirdo names. Okay. This is from the Associated Press and Colleen Slevin. The United States has issued its first passport with an X gender designation, marking a milestone in the recognition of the rights of people who do not identify as male or female, and expects to be able to offer the option more broadly next year, the State Department said Wednesday. The department did not identify the passport recipient, but Dana Zizim, it's spelled Z-Z-Y-Y-M, an intersex activist from Fort Collins, Colorado, told the AP in a telephone interview that they received it. Since 2015, Zizim, who prefers a gender-neutral pronoun, has been in a legal battle with the State Department to obtain a passport that did not require Zizim to lie about gender by picking either male or female. Zizim, pronounced Zim, yes, of course it's pronounced Zim. So why didn't you spell it Z-I-M-M? Because Zizim is obviously a made-up name, but that's part of the attraction. Picked up the UPS package with the passport after getting an early morning text and phone call from their lawyer, Paul Castillo of Lambda Legal, that it had arrived. The Zizim had stayed up late celebrating Intersex Awareness Day with two visiting activists. While Zizim, 63, said it was thrilling to finally get the passport, the goal was to help the next generation of intersex people win recognition as full citizens with rights rather than travel the globe, Zizim said. I'm not a problem. I'm a human being. That's the point, Zizim said. And yes, served in the Navy as a male. Yes, the U.S. Armed Forces seems to be chock full of people like that these days. And let's go back to the chat. Now, Dennis Dale. Hello, Dennis. Now, in Portland, people wear their pronouns on their chest, usually they, them. If you think that name is weird, there's a town in California called Zizix, or I suppose it's pronounced Zix, says Head McNeck. At least half the students in a walkout are just skipping class. We had a walkout when I was in high school. It was some sort of Greenpeace was protesting American atomic testing in the Aleutian Islands. And so the day before the walkout, the principal gets on the PA and says, well, if you're going downtown to protest in front of the American consulate, then you don't have to go to school. But if you're not going to go downtown, then you have to come to school. I had no interest in protesting, in front of the American consulate downtown, but I did get a day off school. The adults are to be driven insane. They get off on this, says Dawn Willis. Apparently, pimento cheese is considered the caviar of Southern American cuisine, says Ashimane Bravo. The character, the private investigator on Better Call Saul, he said that in an episode. I remember that. Gamion said, I've paid $11 in New York City for an avocado on bread with some pepper sprinkled on top. Anwar says that is a lot even for New York City. Okay, what else? A student walkout that for once isn't pretentious self-indulgence, says Steve. Most amazing thing in this entire stream. Are male to female transgenders envious of menstruation, says Dennis Dale. I don't know. When I hear this, people talking about trans, I always get confused. Well, was this person wrongly gendered at birth as a male or a female? It's got to the point now where I can imagine that men, if they're interested in what they believe to be a woman, would have to quiz them about the whole trans issue. You don't want to ask a woman directly whether they used to be a man, because I'm sure that would be considered insulting and could possibly incite violence. Yo Mama says Sir John A. Macdonald was a legendary drunk. Ashiman Bravo says Twitter's Jack Dorsey said hyperinflation will take over USA and the world. Guess who's heavily invested, oh so conveniently, in Bitcoin? Why, that would be Jack Dorsey. Let's see. John S. says, I've yet to figure out why heavy drinking is supposed to be shocking to us proles, like we aren't aware these people are lifelong day drinkers. Pelosi, hello. Don't mix your SSRIs with booze. I was listening to a YouTube compilation of stuff Norm Macdonald had said, and he's talking about alcoholism now being a disease. No, it's a real disease. And how is this disease manifested? Because you drink a lot. And he said that alcoholism, compared to, say, rectal cancer, is obviously the best disease there is, because you get to sit around and drink booze all day. I suppose people found Norm's comedy a little bit shocking back in the day. But of course, he only died a few weeks ago, but it's amazing to me he got away with it for as long as he did. Yes, Dennis Dale, Dr. Blasey Ford. There's a black politician from Ontario called Leslyn Lewis, a woman, and she styles herself doctor. I think she has a doctor of lawyering, something like that. And she was speaking out on COVID and making controversial claims. And so some snooty columnist said that, it's Leslyn Lewis, PhD or JD or something, not MD. So she is not qualified to give medical advice. Well, Dr. Jill Biden isn't even a JD or a PhD or a DD. She's an EdD. And that doesn't stop her from giving away medical advice. Dennis Dale says, I'm just going to start telling people I have Tourette's. Respectable commenting name says rage and despondency would probably be an improvement. I've grown so used to this wicked world I can barely even react most of the time with inappropriate laughter. Sam Hyde is a genius, says Don Willis. And John S. loves Norm. Hello to me too. Okay. The sun is about this high, says I Judas Fly Shy. Let's see. Don Willis says, I remember a time when you attempted to skip school. A burly gym teacher would grab you by the neck and walk you back in. Good times. What are KMG's predictions for the Charlottesville rally trial that is underway? Everybody gets the maximum sentence. That's my prediction. I mean, after what happened in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol on January 6th, people being held in solitary confinement since that time, and it's now the end of October. Isn't that supposed to be unconstitutional? But no, these people were Trump supporters, the ones that, weren't feds. And being a Trump supporter is worse than murder, it would seem. Bill Gates. I used to have a fair amount of respect for Bill Gates. I mean, he's the man who invented the personal computer industry. Well, the software industry anyway. And, but now he's a toll collector. He gets richer and richer simply collecting tolls, a toll on most computers that are sold. And, despite the fact that Bill Gates is not an MD, he does not even have a university degree. He is a college dropout. He never ceases to instruct us about COVID and other health-related matters. I've talked about this issue before. It's important. It's not going away. And forewarned is forearmed, as they say. This is from Carolyn Delbert at Men's Health. Bill Gates wants us to eat 100% synthetic beef. He has a point. Bill Gates suggests synthetic beef like Beyond Meat is a key part of climate action. Lab-grown meat still has extremely high costs, but taste-wise, it has passed muster. We'll see about that. Gates pushes meat alternatives because of meat's high cost in global emissions, a palpable falsehood, and I'll get to that shortly. Bill Gates has a big idea to fight climate change. I just hate this style. This relentlessly chatty. The Microsoft co-founder and chair of the investment fund Breakthrough Energy Ventures recently suggested that all rich countries should move to 100% synthetic beef in an interview with MIT Technology Review. Does that mean I'll have to move to a poor country in order to still eat beef? I mean, I'm willing to do it. Why is Gates, a direct and indirect investor in brands like Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods, pushing for synthetic meat, particularly synthetic beef, as a climate solution? Oh, I don't know, because he has a direct personal involvement in it. He makes money when people do this. That might be one reason. The Western Journal points out that the Food and Agricultural Organization predicted a global shortage in protein-rich foods following the COVID-19 pandemic wake of the coronavirus pandemic. What? Who edited this? And approximately 1 billion people in the world suffer from protein deficiency, according to the Cornell Alliance for Science. In wealthier nations, then, synthetic beef is a good place to start to solve that problem and slow the effects of climate change, too. Here's Gates via the Technology Review. Quote, "You can get used to the taste difference. Yes. And I suppose if we were forced to eat dog food, we'd eventually get used to that as well. And the claim is they're going to make it taste even better over time. Eventually, that green premium is modest enough that you can sort of change the behavior of people or use regulation to totally shift the demand. But the politics are challenging. There are all these bills that say it's got to be called basically lab garbage to be sold. They don't want us to use the beef label, unquote. That's because it's not beef, Bill." Remember, this is a man who came up with or supported a plan to throw dust into the atmosphere in order to blot out the sun. This is supervillain stuff. The different agricultural and food lobbies around the world have pushed for regulation so that, for example, consumers can legally complain that vegan restaurants don't serve them animal products. These same kinds of laws also protect consumers from chocolate-flavored candy instead of chocolate, for example, or processed cheese food instead of cheese. But lately, products like Beyond Meat have made headway in being shelved next to the real meat, where consumers can see and grab them. Relentlessly chatty. This is good because the problem Gates is identifying is huge. Agriculture accounts for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US alone, where we have some of the most efficient agriculture in the world to produce our meat and dairy. Gates says developing nations with less advanced farming have an even longer way to go toward agricultural carbon neutrality. When Gates refers to synthetic meat, he's likely talking about the growing market of very sophisticated vegan meat alternatives like Beyond Meat, but he's also an investor in at least one true lab meat setup. These companies grow individual chunks of muscle tissue. That's what meat is, separately from any living animal. Why is beef such a focus for these companies? Because raising beef uses a lot more resources than poultry or even pork. Per Smithsonian, making beef a key item that suppliers are keen to replace in consumers' minds. Why would they want to do that unless they were evil? If you want to help the planet, and don't we all, but can't bring yourself to give up meat entirely, eliminating beef from your diet is the next best thing, the Smithsonian reports. The Smithsonian magazine? I'm sorry, what does Frankenfoods have to do with the mission of the Smithsonian? Oh, but perhaps we're not going to be bullied into giving up meat. There is a story by Chris McLennan at the Northwest Star. Fake meat company hits a financial snag. Oh, dear. A hand holding up a package of Beyond Meat, Beyond Burger plant-based patties. No soy or gluten, Oh, and it has a new, meatier taste, 35% less saturated fat. But they're still pushing this totally discredited line that saturated fats are bad for us. One of the world's biggest fake meat companies has hit a financial snag. The US-based Beyond Meat has suffered a sell-off of its shares after reporting a major hit to its revenue forecasts. Beyond Meat holds a large market share in Australia and is often portrayed as a trailblazer in the alternative protein manufacturing world. The plant-based meat substitute company was founded in 2009 by Ethan Brown, who took the company public in 2019. It has backing from high-profile names like Bill Gates, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Snoop Dogg, as if I would seek Snoop Dogg's advice about anything. On Friday, the company told the U.S. Stock Exchange its retail sales had plunged, downgrading its third quarter forecast from 120 to 140 million down to just over 100 million. It blamed slowing growth through the pandemic and increased competition like rivals from Impossible Foods for the fall. The company has suffered from a weakening trend of people stockpiling fake meat burgers and sausages at home as they started dining out again. How about that? It turns out that perhaps people don't like eating grass, because that is what Beyond Meat's Beyond Burger is made from, a grass. I guess they're trying to turn us all into cattle. And I quoted from this article a month ago, but I'm going to quote from it again because it has, facts in it that are inconvenient for the fake meat lobby and for Bill Gates. This is Janet Levy, The Great Reset of Beef Consumption, from the American Thinker, September 21st. You are not going to eat beef in the future, I 100% guarantee it. Political commentator and rancher Glenn Beck stresses each of these words at the beginning of his recent video. He explains that in the not too distant future, public land will not be used for cattle grazing, resulting in government-imposed meat shortages. Beck worries that our food supply will be crippled by the globalists and Americans will no longer have control over what they eat, how it is processed, and what it costs. Globalist advocates of the New World Order are promoting so-called sustainability programs that will raise beef prices so high that only the super rich will be able to afford it. This is designed to be achieved by outlawing grazing on public land, allowing an oligopoly of meat packers to squeeze ranchers out of business, and popularizing plant-based meat. It's the big meat packers who will make this fake meat so their profits will continue to skyrocket, sustained under the cover of climate virtue. Veganism is being advanced as the most ethical way to sustain the planet and to promote human health and animal welfare. But along with that, ranchers and small and medium-scale beef packers are being marginalized. The very consumption of meat is being damned. Deploying outright lies, a misguided agenda threatens individual liberty and our freedom to farm, own livestock, control our land, and choose our diet. The socialist roster of lies about meat eating must be countered. One of the biggest lies is that veganism protects the environment. But according to Dr. Frank Mitloehner, professor and air quality extension specialist at the University of California, Davis, if the entire population of the US became vegan for a year, emissions would be reduced by a mere 2.6%. He also says advocates of the Green New Deal have been dishonest about the water input assigned to beef. Cattle mostly ingest green water or rainwater. What's more, they soon release much of that back to Earth by urination, which cannot be said of trees. Another big lie is that beef production causes substantial waste of crops that could be consumed by humans. But it's not as if beef cattle are mostly fed grain that humans may consume. In fact, 84% of livestock feed is inedible to humans. Corn husk, oat straw, almond hulls, soybean skins, and other agricultural waste. In a sense, livestock convert what we cannot eat into what we can, namely dairy products and beef, both sources of high-quality protein. 48% of our protein and only 24% of our calorie intake comes from animal sources. American practices add to that nature-driven energy efficiency. With just 6% of the world's herd, America supplies 18% of the world's beef. In terms of land use, too, it is livestock that create a beneficial cycle. 2/3 of America's food-producing land is considered marginal. It's rocky, hilly, or dry, or has poor soil. Without ruminants, which upcycle whatever grows on marginal land into nutritious, digestible beef and dairy products, most of our land would go waste. Cattle also produce manure, which accounts for half of all fertilizers used worldwide to grow fruits, vegetables, and grains. Methane has been much maligned by leftist environmentalists, but it accounts for only 10% of total greenhouse gases in the US. Moreover, cows do not add new carbon to the atmosphere. The methane they emit ultimately comes from the carbon in the air, which is taken up by grass and plants during photosynthesis. Cattle feeding on the grass and plants send back the same carbon into the atmosphere as methane in their flatus. The slowest part of this cycle is the breakdown of methane into water and carbon dioxide, which takes 10 to 12 years. After this, plants use carbon dioxide and water again, and the cycle continues. Wasted food, 1/3 of all food produced in the world goes to waste, results in far more greenhouse gas production than eating meat. Not only are the energy, water, and other input used to grow the food wasted, but it also rots in landfills, producing methane and other greenhouse gases. Meat and dairy make up only 14% of America's food waste, while fruits and vegetables make up 42% and grain 22%. Giving up meat would therefore result in significantly more wasted food and proportionally more greenhouse gases. She then goes into the problem of the big four beef processors crowding out ranchers and generally doing all sorts of bad things. But I won't quote from that. I've covered that subject before. Again, this is from AmericanThinker.com, Janet Levy, The Great Reset of Beef Consumption, September the 21st. And, some good news. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Cigarette sales rose in 2020 for the first time in 20 years. New FTC report confirms people are lighting up more during the pandemic. Yes, probably because cigarettes actually make people feel better. And they don't mess up your brain like antidepressants, which actually make people feel bad. And yes, let's talk about polling, or manufactured consent, as I like to call it. You may have seen that Noam Chomsky came out very strongly for using whatever strong arm measures are necessary to get everyone injected. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Another dubious YouGov poll has found that the vast majority of Brits support the reintroduction of COVID restrictions, such as mask mandates, despite little evidence of that being practiced in the real world. With lockdown fetishists attempting to pressure the government to reversing so-called Freedom Day, when mask mandates and other restrictions were lifted, a new survey was released claiming that the idea had widespread support from the British public. According to the poll, 81% support mandatory masks on public transport, while 76% support the same rule in shops. 67% want mandatory social distancing in pubs and restaurants. Apparently 20% want a full lockdown. 30% want no household mixing indoors. 42% want no large events, etc., etc. More nonsense. No one's doing any of this now, pointed out Adam Brooks. I suggest these are either manipulated polls or are just people who do not go out. Indeed, a previous poll by YouGov claimed only 60% were still wearing face masks in public. That figure is also likely inflated by those who want to give the responsible answer, no matter whether they actually wear masks or not. Watson reports, in reality, anyone who lives in major cities like London, as I do, can tell you that even with this sustained fear-mongering of the media, a small minority are wearing masks outside, while inside shops, the figure is roughly 50%. Inside pubs, it's barely 10%. Social distancing inside pubs is also virtually non-existent at this point. And Majid Nawaz tweeted, journalists, it's important to regularly remember, as background information, that British polling firm YouGov was founded by former vaccines minister now Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi, MP, and its major shareholder is BlackRock. And if you can't trust BlackRock, who can you trust? BlackRock, described here as a transnational investment firm, which the New Republic wrote, was having a very good pandemic by casting itself as socially responsible. Last year, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink said that Americans should wear face masks if they wish to see an economic recovery. And in further news of this sort, from the same source, Danish health minister threatens to shut down society if more people don't get vaccinated. The Danish health minister, Magnus Heunicke, is threatening to shut down society if more people don't get vaccinated after the country experienced a COVID spike despite over 75% of the population being fully vaccinated. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not going to comment on the phenomenon of COVID continuing to spike, at least in terms of cases, as more and more people become vaccinated. But it makes you think, doesn't it? As we highlighted on Monday, Denmark just suffered its worst COVID caseload since May, with the virus reproduction. R number also jumped to 2.01, which is the highest level since January. Despite the fact that 85% of people over the age of 12 are vaccinated in Denmark, the country has seen more than 1,000 daily cases of COVID for a week straight. The health minister said, if we are to keep Denmark open, we must have more people get the vaccine. Although Heunicke said that the vaccine would remain voluntary, he warned ominously the unvaccinated that their refusal to get the jab no longer works. Last year, Danish authorities passed a law that would have allowed the forced vaccination of anyone, with police being used to physically detain people and hold them down while being jabbed, but the effort was abandoned after mass protests. And again, this is another article that makes you think. This is from Mary Kekitos at the Daily Mail. How did Florida end up with one of the best COVID-19 case and death rates in the U.S., despite Governor Ron DeSantis refusing to implement mask or vaccine mandates? During the peak of the recent COVID-19 surge in Florida, the state was recording 101 cases per 100,000 people and 1.77 new deaths per 100,000. Since mid-September, Florida has been seeing declines and is recording 9 cases per 100,000 people and less than 0.2 deaths per 100,000. The declines are despite Governor Ron DeSantis insisting the state would not shut down and refusing to implement mask or vaccine mandates, and instead focusing efforts on early treatment. Experts have suggested the declines seem to follow a familiar 2-month cycle since the pandemic began, cases and deaths increasing for about 2 months before dropping. This has also been seen in other states that experienced surges over the summer, such as Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas. Yes, makes you think, and that's all I will say. I'll let you think about this on your own. And here's a story from New York City, from the New York Daily News, Thomas Tracy. The New York Police Department is doing everything in its power to convince cops to receive life-saving COVID vaccine shots. As the city's mandate deadline looms, a cutoff that could send a quarter of the police force home without pay. We have to prepare, as this is going to go into effect Friday evening, and that's exactly what we are going to do, Police Commissioner Dermot Shea said Tuesday. We have vaccines available throughout the city for our members. Police say that 73% of the NYPD has gotten at least one vaccination shot. The number should increase ahead of the deadline, Shea said. City employees not vaccinated by Friday will be sent home without pay. Yes, and I wonder what's that going to do to the crime situation in New York City? I think we can guess. And let's go here. I don't know whether there's anything I can. According to research published yesterday in Nature magazine, a vaccine evading variant is here. This heavily mutated variant called A30 exists in the wild and has been found in patients on at least 2 continents. The researchers say that it overcomes both the mRNA and DNA AAV vaccines. And let's top this off by taking our daily look at thedailyskeptic.org. And let's see. Okay. Toby Young tweets, the BBC News is reporting that Rachel Reeves, in a response to the budget, says the UK has the highest COVID death toll in Europe. That's not true. In fact, as of October the 17th, we had the 10th highest. Can you flag as health disinformation? COVID test swabs found contaminated with aluminum, silicon, and dangerous chemicals. Okay. Unvaccinated set to be banned from Berlin Christmas market. German officials have given the green light to prohibit the unvaccinated public from attending the Berlin Christmas market. Those looking to gain access will have to provide proof that they are double jabbed or have recovered from COVID, with the only exception being children under the age of 12 who have not been offered the vaccination. Although venues can set their own rules, thereby permitting the unvaccinated to enter, albeit with a negative COVID test, a number of Berlin Christmas markets have already pledged to bar the unvaccinated from the premises. So it's good to know that everyone at Berlin Christmas markets is going to be safe from COVID because they have been double or triple jabbed. They still have to worry about being shot to death by Muslim fanatics. And there's nothing that governments could possibly do to stop people being shot to death by Muslim fanatics. NHS Test and Trace was a £37 billion failure, report says. This is from the Public Accounts Committee. U.S. vaccine panels approve the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds. Experts are worse than non-experts at forecasting cases and deaths, study finds. Experts haven't exactly covered themselves in glory during the pandemic. Their pronouncements concerning things like lockdowns, masks, and herd immunity seem to be more correlated with swings in Twitter sentiment than with any fundamental changes in scientific evidence. We're used to seeing graphs like the one depicted, which shows the actual course of the epidemic deviating rather substantially from what was predicted. And where there is some correspondence between data and forecast, this is usually because the forecasts included so many different scenarios that one of them had to be right. Famously, Neil Ferguson said it was almost inevitable that cases would reach 100,000 per day after some restrictions were removed on July the 19th. What cases actually did over the next 10 days was fall by nearly 50%. If Ferguson tells you it's almost inevitable that he'll meet you on time, it's probably best to bring a book or delay your own arrival by half an hour. Okay, so the experts aren't very good at predicting where cases or deaths will be a few weeks hence, but they're surely better than the rest of us. And since some information is better than no information, we shouldn't dismiss them entirely, right? A study published earlier this year did find that experts defined as epidemiologists, statisticians, mathematical modelers, virologists, and clinicians were more accurate at forecasting the UK's death toll in 2020 than were random members of the public. In April 2020, Gabriel Recchia and colleagues asked 140 experts as well as 2,000 members of the public to guess how many people in the UK would die of COVID by December 31st. Each participant was asked to give a 75% confidence interval for their guess. The correct answer fell within the 75% confidence level interval for 10% of non-experts and 36% of experts. So the experts did better, but less than half of them were even close. A more recent study reached slightly different conclusions earlier this year. The EpiForecast group at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine hosted a forecasting competition in which they invited members of the public to predict weekly case and death numbers in the UK. The competition ran from May 24th to August 16th. Both experts and non-experts were eligible to compete, experts being those who declared themselves as such when they signed up. So we're presumably talking about epidemiologists and people with a background in forecasting. What did the experts find? In this case, the self-declared experts performed slightly worse than the non-experts, although neither group did especially well. The psychologist Philip Tetlock has gathered a large amount of evidence that when it comes to quantitative forecasting, experts aren't any better than well-informed laymen, even if they do have an edge over the man on the street. Pressure mounts on the UK HSA to stop publishing data showing infection rates higher in the, and I'll leave you to guess which group that is. Let's go to the chat. Me Too says experts can be highly delicious if prepared correctly. Expert Lotto. Yes, it's the first I'd heard of that. Ashimane Bravo asked, did Rasputin do anything wrong? I remember reading a book about Russia from the Decabrist revolt in 1825 to the First World War, and the author, Edward Crankshaw, he ends with the assassination plot, the conspiracy plot to kill Rasputin, that in his opinion, that this event was so stupid that he didn't want to talk about that society anymore. And of course, things got a lot stupider and a lot bloodier in Russia after Rasputin's assassination. My Trail of Disgrace says, Little Lord Trudeau's speech police are on the way. New government administered smoked bugs and soy barbecue joint opens up on the block. 50 good boy Soros Gates Schwab tokens for a full course bug meal and soy protein drink. John S. says, Florida has always been God's waiting room. Deaths from all causes should be naturally trend higher than less elderly filled states. Yes, it was quite common, though no longer, for my province of British Columbia to pat itself on the back. Oh, we don't want to become another Florida. And I thought, have you looked at the average age of people in British Columbia versus the average age of people in Florida? Yes, it is the state where people go to die. Arizona being another one. Canadians are very fond of Arizona in the winter. Those from the west side of the country, those on the east side of the country, particularly Quebec, are very fond of Florida. Don Willis says, don't know the size of your urban area. People need to support smoked meat dealers, maybe take in a lunch, buy some bulk for parties, a lot of barbecue biz. Don't get the same traffic as regular restaurants. I love smoked meat myself. I can't believe Majid pivoted to a real deal right-winger over the last year. Strangest heel turn, says No Sleep. And, okay. Drug talks here. I get John S. is asking me again, or someone is asking me in the chat again, whether I plan to review the new Dune movie. As a rule, I don't review new movies or movies that are new in the theater because, I mean, you only get to watch them once and then you have to pay again. And you can't, you can't stop and take screen captures, that sort of thing. Or you can't, notice strange things. Like last night, I was rewatching Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. And I thought that I had remembered in a street scene in LA that there was a poster for an appearance by Lenny Bruce. And there it was, and right in the right corner of the screen. And I had remembered correctly. And Chocokin666 says, really wanted a cigarette today. John S. says, oddly buying steak today, grass-fed, was only $7.99 a pound for a ribeye. The regular ribeye was $15.99 a pound. This was at Aldi. Okay. Jokin666 says the animal gives its body for our sustenance. The least we can do is afford it some dignity. Yeah, that's generally my position. To the extent that animals serve us, we serve them. Okay. Okay, I can't say that. I don't think I can say that too. Yako Raipala, our Finnish friend, says Rasputin is one person who doesn't deserve his bad reputation. He was one of the few advisors who actually tried to talk the Tsar out of joining the Great War. So it's time to go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies, where he is discussing various theories of the causes of collapse. Elman Service's law of evolutionary potential has an intellectual history similar to Megger's ideas, lack of initial acceptance, with occasional later usage, sometimes by authors who either do not recognize or do not note this precursor to their work. The law states as follows: the more specialized and adapted a form is in a given evolutionary stage, the smaller its potential for passing to the next stage. Specific evolutionary progress is inversely related to general evolutionary potential. Within this view, a success at adaptation breeds conservatism. Dominant polities are less able to accommodate change. Successful complex societies become locked into their adaptations and are easily bypassed by those less specialized. So by having greater flexibility, less complex border states gain an increasing competitive advantage and are thus able ultimately to topple older established states. Service uses this principle to account for the success of barbarians along China's northern frontier, in Mesopotamia and in Mesoamerica, and for discontinuities in political developments in Peru. In each case, he suggests, newly civilized peripheral populations adopt some competitive advantage, an organizational feature, weapon, tactic, or the like, that the old center is too conservative to adopt, and thereby rise to dominance. R.N. Adams follows similar reasoning and believes this rigidity and conservatism result from investment in controlling major energy sources. Many investigators see competition with less complex neighbors as one of only a number of factors leading to collapse. Service's law can perhaps be expanded into a more general failure to adapt argument. Several authors make such an argument that complex societies disappear because of some inability to bring forth an appropriate response to circumstances. Melko, for one, argues, like Service, that once established, a civilization's capacities for change become limited. Collapse results from socio-political ossification, bureaucratic inefficiency, or inability to deal with internal or external problems. He identifies the decline of Ming China to such matters. Writing as a sociologist, Buckley argues that rigidity in any social institution must lead to internal upheaval or to ineffectiveness against external challenge. Gregory Bateson suggested that civilizations expire by loss of flexibility, and that flexibility is lost automatically if it is not exercised. Norman Yaffe has argued that with the loss of provinces in the Old Babylonian period, the revenues needed for public building, waterworks, and the military declined, but the attempt to sustain these did not. To maintain expenditures, the crown became so oppressive that the empire quickly decomposed to its constituent elements. And without a drastic change in the idea of government on the part of the crown, writes Yaffe, the power of the Babylonian state, subject to these negative feedback mechanisms, could only weaken further over time. In short, a failure to make the correct response to circumstances engendered collapse. Gregory Johnson argues that in the Susiana region, administrative breakdown and state fission occurred when administrative demands exceeded capacity in the Middle Uruk period. Again, this basic notion is of an inability to bring about an appropriate response, which in this case would mean increasing administrative capacity. I'll note that I believed, falsely as it turned out, that after the economic collapse of 2007-2008, which effectively wiped out the surplus which had been created by capitalism, that nonsense such as diversity consultants, because the state simply didn't have money to pay for this. Well, it could pay for it, but then would have to stop paying for actually useful things. But instead, of course, the amount of parasitic spending on diversity has increased tremendously, despite the fact that we don't have the money to pay for it. And it was decided that we'll simply borrow the money. because apparently we'll never have to pay it back. We will just wreck our currencies with inflation. And let's talk about the Biden White House. It occurred to me today, thinking about this, that people laugh at the notion that Canada, particularly the Canada of Justin Trudeau, actually influences anyone else in the world. Looking at the Biden White House, and I don't know who's running the place. Susan Rice, some other woman. It's clearly not Joe Biden, but it appears to be very much influenced by Canada, particularly in the realm of so-called gender. That people laughed when Justin Trudeau said that going into the NAFTA renegotiations with the United States and Mexico, that a gender lens would be applied to the question of trade rules. Yes, because that's what you're looking at. But here is a document from the White House, released October the 22nd, called Fact Sheet, National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. The Biden-Harris administration issues first ever national gender strategy to advance the full participation of all people, including women and girls, in the United States and around the world. In what way are women and girls not part of the full participation of all people in the United States? And what business is it of the Biden White House what sex roles are in other countries? But nevertheless, President Biden and Vice President Harris believe that advancing gender equity and equality is fundamental to every individual's economic security, safety, health, and ability to exercise their most basic rights. It is also essential to economic growth and development, democracy, and political stability, and the security of nations around the globe. Ensuring that all people, regardless of gender, have the opportunity to realize their full potential is therefore both a moral and strategic imperative. Yet no country in the world has achieved gender equality. And we are at an inflection point. Oh, really? Are we? The COVID-19 pandemic has fueled a health crisis. Oh, that's what it's done, has it? It's fueled a health crisis and an economic crisis and a caregiving crisis that have manifested the challenges that women and girls, especially women and girls of color, have long faced. It has also exacerbated a shadow pandemic of gender-based violence in the United States and around the world. These overlapping crises have underscored that for far too long, the status quo has left too many behind. This moment demands that we build back better. There's that sinister phrase again. It requires that we acknowledge and address longstanding gender discrimination and the systemic barriers to full participation that have held back women and girls. And it requires that we bring the talent and potential of all people to bear to face the challenges of our time. About 60% of college students in the United States are now women, compared to only 40% from men. So it appears that more than gender equality, gender equity, if you will, has been achieved, at least in the college system. It requires that we bring the talent and potential of all people to bear to face the challenges of our time. That's why the Biden-Harris administration established the White House Gender Policy Council, charged with leading the development of the first ever national strategy on gender equity and equality, which sets forth an aspirational vision and a comprehensive agenda to advance gender equity and equality in domestic and foreign policy and demonstrate that families, communities, and nations around the world stand to benefit. The strategy identifies 10 interconnected priorities: economic security, gender-based violence, health, education, justice and immigration, human rights and equality under the law, security and humanitarian relief, climate change, science and technology, and democracy, participation, and leadership. These priorities are inherently linked and must be tackled in concert. The strategy also adopts a, wait for it, intersectional approach that considers the barriers and challenges faced by those who experience intersecting and compounding forms of discrimination and bias related to gender, race, and other factors, including sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, disability, age, and socioeconomic status. This includes addressing discrimination and bias faced by Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American people, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, and other people of color. Strategic priorities include improving economic security. As we recover from the pandemic, we have the opportunity to build an economy that works for women and their families. You may have noticed that feminists have been panicking over the last year and a half because the shutdown brought about by COVID has meant more women are staying home to look after their children, which apparently we've all decided is a bad thing because it doesn't matter who raises children. Any stranger will do, apparently. So we've got to get women back to work. To build back better, we will ensure that people have equal access to good jobs, including by addressing persistent gender discrimination and systemic barriers to full workforce participation. Invest in care infrastructure and care workers to help rebuild the economy and lower costs for working families. Dismantle the barriers to equal opportunity in education, that undermine the ability to compete on a level playing field, recognizing that education affects future economic security. Preventing and responding to gender-based violence. I wonder if the boffins at the White House know that 80% of murder victims are male. Gender-based violence is endemic in homes, schools, workplaces, the military, communities, and online, and far too often a hallmark of conflict and humanitarian crises. It exacts tremendous costs on the safety, health, and economic security of survivors and their families. To prevent in response to gender-based violence, we will work to eliminate gender-based violence wherever it occurs by developing and strengthening national and global laws and policies, investing in comprehensive services for survivors, and increasing prevention efforts. You may remember that last year when he was running for president, Joe Biden said, not privately, but publicly, that in cases of accusation of sexual assault, he would eliminate the presumption of innocence. Yes, that's how committed Joe Biden is to justice. And it goes on and on and on, but you can see just how infantile the American government has become, even just as infantile as Canada's government, which is really quite a negative achievement. Don Willis says, quoted Charles Manson, if you're going to do something, do it well and leave something witchy. Okay. Don Willis says, you all should really get the jab. Ashley Main Bravo says, Modest Mouse has a song called A Bukowski. Gender achieved, says Chokokin 666. I remember reading a Bukowski poem where he said he would read Hegel and Heidegger in the library. It's from Ashley Main Bravo again. It has brought the U.S. economy to its knees on the backs of small business owners and mid-America blue collar, says Don Willis. I'm guessing Justin Trudeau runs the Biden White House, says Oscar Toe. Popcasso 88's gender strategy repealing the 19th Amendment. Here's my new church billboard idea. Jesus doesn't need you to remember a password. Oscar Toe says, I always had to be like an old man with hard peppermint and butterscotch candy. Someone give KMG their HBO Max login. Oh, okay. It's on HBO Max, is it? I heard that channel wasn't doing too well. Okay. So, topic number 4. Oh, yes, we're in topic number 4 and related stories. This is from Andrea Whitberg at American Thinker. You know, the critical race theory and the whole race relations industry, you know, I said that social media was invented to drive women crazy or crazier. Well, the race relations industry, as we used to call it, at least that's what Peter Simple used to call it, seems to be invented to drive people of color, especially black people, crazy, because it goes from strength to strength, but the people it is supposedly benefiting become ever angrier and more bitter. Critical race theory demonizes whites and seeks to create dangerous racial tribalism within America, less obviously CRT, by which I mean all variations of the theme holding that American white people are irredeemably racist, is that it paints minorities, especially blacks, as pathetic, helpless people. For all the talk about black power and strong black women, those blacks marinated in CRT view themselves as weak. And nothing illustrates that better than Kyla N. Golding's opinion piece in the Harvard Crimson. Golding, 2 years away from graduation and a Crimson editorial editor, decided to go public with her decision to fall off the pre-med track. It wasn't that she discovered that the work was boring or difficult, or that her goals changed. Instead, this gal who planned to be a STEM major discovered, quote, how white supremacy lives and breathes in each of our bodies, spreading between each of us, body to body, like contagion, unquote. The triggering event for Golding's realizing that she's a victim down to the cellular level, far below the melanin she wears on her skin, was Breonna Taylor's death, which Golding describes as a murder. If a Golding had a genuinely scientific mindset and had investigated the details behind Taylor's death, she wouldn't have used that word. Taylor, although a paramedic, was also part of a major drug smuggling ring in Louisville, Kentucky, that her former boyfriend was running. Taylor's latest boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, was also involved in the drug trade. When warrant-holding police loudly and repeatedly knocked on the door to the apartment before entering, Walker met them with bullets, so they fired back. Taylor wasn't hiding in bed. She was right next to Walker, got shot, and died. As I told my kids, if you're friends with criminals, you'll end up in jail or dead. But Golding, a typical Harvard student, had no interest in facts. The mythology around Taylor was so powerful that, when Golding learned that the two officers involved were defending themselves against Walker's murderous efforts, she had an epic and pathetic race-based panic attack. Quote, that day, my body inhaled molecules of white supremacy as they seeped out of my computer from that proctored Zoom room. They entered my bloodstream and catalyzed a metabolism that would allow for the invasion of my body by a violently infectious life form, a chronic pain caused by the perpetuation of lethally unjust practices and compounded by the silence and avoidance between myself and my educators when it comes to black women's lives would make its way through and onto neighboring cells within my physical being. The presence of the germ of white supremacy would cause a steric hindrance within me, slowing down and even preventing the reactions of learning and healing that I desperately needed for myself and from others in that moment. The exam began, and I haven't been able to show up mentally or emotionally in a science class since. Well, exposure to CRT seems to have driven this Golding woman insane. If white supremacy is a disease that infects people, well, what do we do with diseases? Well, where possible, we eradicate them, don't we? And we have seen much of what they call eliminationist language adopted against white people in recent years. The chorus becomes ever louder. David Zuckerman writes in The American Thinker, he talks about the spending bill, and he gives the opinion that he thinks that this is it was a stitch up. The fix was in from the beginning. So, Bret Stephens, token conservative at the New York Times. There's one other one there with a name that's hard to pronounce. Ross Douthat, yes. So Bret Stephens and Gail Collins have a chat weekly. The Bret and Gail chat for October 26 began with expressions of sympathy for Republican turncoat Liz Cheney from Republican turncoat Bret Stephens, who went over to the other side when he quit the Wall Street Journal for the New York Times at the time of Donald Trump's first presidential campaign. Stephens, in his opening remark, alluded to the latest effort of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy to make Liz Cheney's life as unpleasant as possible. This is projection from Stevens, as it is Cheney who is intent on making the lives of true House Republicans as unpleasant as possible by her service as a Pelosi puppet on the January 6th sham Select Committee. I quickly add that Stevens did not elaborate on the alleged effort from McCarthy vis-a-vis turncoat Cheney. Stevens went on, in response to a question from Collins, to shrug that Cheney's quest for re-election is not likely to succeed, while at the same time he issued a statement despicable but expectable from the likes of leftist fanatics. Quote, "But I'm guessing that Cheney's re-election chances aren't great either. I think that at best she can lay down a marker for the future, proving that at least some Republicans refuse to participate in the cult of Il Duce wannabes," unquote. Stevens then called for a third party that stands for classically liberal values like free speech, free markets, and free societies. Who else is calling for a new third party besides Bret Stephens? Jonah Goldberg, David French. And essentially what they're advocating, free speech, free markets, free societies, classical liberalism. Well, repeated studies have shown that this, I don't know, what would you call it, the Philosophy of Reason magazine enjoys the political support of somewhere between 1 to 3% of Americans. It's a non-starter, and I would very much like to see this third party formed so I can watch it crash and burn in real time. And our final topic today is Satan is real. Halloween used to be a one-day festival, and it was for kids. Yes, kids would dress up, they'd walk around the neighborhood with a bag or a pillowcase and get free candy. And that was it. Then adults took it up. And then it lasted a week, now a month. And of course, the shock of people making themselves look grotesque is no longer so great because people just walk out on the streets every day looking grotesque. Halloween used to be a symbol of the majority Christianity in our societies, that the devil, as it were, had been tamed so we could make fun of him and make fun of witches. Of course, there are many people who outspokenly believe in the devil, worship the devil, and are witches. They're proud of it. So Halloween is just not fun anymore. William Briggs writes, Revolver recently ran an article on why companies are woke, coming to the same conclusion as us. They are woke because they have no choice. It's either, in their words, get woke or go broke. One main reason is fear of lawsuits in a climate of anti-white animus. An incident from the piece highlights how deep the kimchi we're in. Abercrombie and Fitch was sued into oblivion for failing to reflect racial diversity in its marketing strategy. Seems the company had to piss away $40 million to several thousand minority and female plaintiffs. Yes, one can only imagine the gross psychic pain of leafing through the Abercrombie and Fitch catalog and not seeing enough people of color. So why not enough white men and non-white men in their advertising, which isn't any sane person's idea of anything even approaching a whiff of a shade of a crime. Nevertheless, fearing they'd lose a lawsuit, amidst growing anti-white fervor, they settled and gave the race hustlers their blood money. And so now A&F, against their own will, is woke. This suit also explains why non-white men are now the feature of most or all ads. Well, that's a pop culture clothing company and advertising, decadent by definition. How about in areas rich in experts? Surely they are immune from the woke mind virus. You will recall I predicted 2 weeks ago that within 2 years, a Nobel Prize in Science would go to a black, perhaps even a black woman, merely for the sake of appearance. This sage forecast came after the announcement of this year's prizes when it was discovered there wasn't an official victim anywhere in the lists. The next item doesn't exactly count as a verification, but it's close. From the political magazine Scientific American comes the headline, "Nominees for a Science Award were all white men. Nobody won." We learn a protest by a group of scientists that has ignited spirited discussions. Oh, discussions, is that what they are? About the persistent lack of diversity in such awards. Lack of diversity means insufficient official victims, regardless of whether or not they are deserving. Here's the proof. 5 of the nation's top ice scientists found themselves in a conundrum. They had been tasked with a formidable job reviewing candidates for the American Geophysical Union's Fellows Program, the most prestigious award given by the world's largest Earth and Space Science Society. But when the group looked at its list of candidates, all nominated by peers, it spotted a problem. Every nominee on the list was a white man. That was kind of a bit of a showstopper for me, said Helen Fricker, a glaciologist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and one of the 5 committee members. When Briggs comments, one instantly suspects Fricker was promoted beyond her abilities because she was a she. This, of course, may not be so, but it is irrational to entertain the idea. An over-promoted person is naturally going to identify merit as a problem. Here's the hilarity. Quote, the selection process for the award this past spring was an arduous, careful operation from beginning to end, unquote. This, with other details on the process, means that they found the best persons to nominate, where best is relative to ability to do geophysics. Now Fricker confirms our suspicions. One of the reasons I was put on the committee was because I'd been quite vocal about the year that I'd been a fellow. I was very much in the minority, and we needed to do better and get more women. Do better, as we know, means promote more women, regardless of ability. So the committee members, led by a probable beneficiary of promotion beyond ability, made an uncomfortable decision. They declined to recommend any nominees at all. Sorry, white men, you have been judged too worthy, too good. You're embarrassing to the rest of the field, so the award goes to no one. So more examples of get woke or go broke. These are coming with increasing rapidity. Witchcraft. Yeah. Witchcraft and necromancy. Oh, yes. Also gender diversity. They come as a package. Now, I'm looking at an ad for Tics, bite-sized Tics for Halloween. And we're shown the boots of, well, it's a boy, and he's wearing big black boots, and he has painted nails, and he is wearing a dress. And guess who shows up at his doorstep? It's the nanny, who's a sexy witch, dressed all in black leather with a big hat and black lipstick and oversized sunglasses. So why is he wearing a dress? Because it makes him feel good. What's your favorite color? Black. The witch responds, oh, other than that, charcoal, she jokes. So a boy with a dress and painted nails is next shown outside wearing a dress and kicking a soccer ball. And some black girl says, it's not Halloween witch yet. And some other little girl makes fun of the sexy witch, who's also wearing one of those spiked necklaces. It turns out she has genuine magic powers. And to some boy who mocks boy in a dress for wearing a dress, she uses her powers to lift him in the air and throw him across the grass. Because we all love witches, right? Witches are people who, worship the devil in exchange for greater powers on earth. But apparently it would be judgmental of us to be opposed to this. I noted that this ad was being heavily ratioed on YouTube. I did my part, but I'm only one man. So I would encourage you to do yours. And what else do we have in the way of ads? I mentioned necromancy, which is communicating with the dead. That's what necromancy means. And bingo. Paul Joseph Watson asks, how does this help us sell bingo? Bingo? Okay, so it's a British commercial for a bingo company, and we see what appears to be a housewife sitting at the kitchen table, but of course it is a man. It is a fierce man dressed up as a woman who recycles and jumps up in the air and play bingo, be a boss, like this man dressed as a woman, and they will give you what, 50 50 pounds in bingo tickets. All right. And then, I don't want to look at this horrible creature any longer. I had rather thought that bingo was an activity that old women like, but apparently they're trying to broaden their market to make it appeal to men who like to dress up as women. And okay, I could scarcely believe this when it was pointed out to me, but this is a real ad for Doritos. And it's an animated ad, and it shows a Mexican family who are made to look absolutely grotesque. And it turns out, okay, so a bowl of Doritos is placed on an altar, and guess what? Doritos have the power to summon the dead, which is definitely the kind of wholesome kind of thinking you want to associate with corn chips, right? Necromancy. This ad has also been heavily ratioed. And again, I have done my bit and would recommend that you do yours as well. So finally, in this topic, a story from the Daily Mail, Jennifer Smith. White male marketing VP at North Carolina hospital wins $10 million reverse discrimination payout after he was replaced by 2 women, one of whom is Black, as part of diversity and inclusion program. David Duval was fired by Novant Health in South Carolina in 2018, 5 days before his 5th work anniversary. At the time, he was the senior VP of marketing and communications. He says he was not given a reason for the firing and was even told by a supervisor that he had done nothing wrong. Duval's role was split into 2 and given to 2 women, Kate Everett and Vicky Free. Everett, who is white, worked beneath him and was promoted to chief PR and communications officer. Free, who is Black, was brought in as the chief marketing officer. Duval says both women are qualified, but no more so than him, and that he was replaced as part of the company's 5-year inclusion and diversity plan. He alleges that he is one of 5 white men who lost their jobs that way in the healthcare group. Okay, so going back to what William Briggs was saying, this company, Novant Health, is willing to get rid of an employee who is, by all accounts, very good at his job for reasons of diversity and inclusion, which results in the creation of an additional, a high-paying position at the company. That is to say, they were prepared to lose real money in order to fire a man for no reason. Let's talk about what is coming up on the show. And tomorrow is Thursday, Theater Thursday. And in keeping with the Halloween theme, I'm going to be discussing a horror movie from 1960 by Georges Franju, which is called Eyes Without a Face. On November the 4th, I will be discussing the first 3 seasons of the German series of Babylon Berlin, which was co-written and co-produced by Tom Tykwer. On November the 11th, I will be discussing a David Mamet's movie from 1991, Homicide. And on November the 18th, Peter Brook's 1963 classic, Lord of the Flies, Beware of the Remake. And I suppose the movies I choose tend to be rather intense and sometimes grim. So I thought I would go with a romantic movie. On November 25th, Leo McCarey's An Affair to Remember, starring Deborah Carr and Cary Grant. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be talking about Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. On November the 5th, Joseph de Maistre's The Executioner. On November the 12th, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. On November the 19th, a book about songs about killing, I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. On November 26th, Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharmaceuticals. On Music Monday, on November the 1st, I'm talking about Don Giovanni, the great opera by Mozart and De Ponte. On November 8th, I will discuss and criticize the cult of the performer. On November the 15th, I'm going to be talking about Beck Hansen. And November 22nd, I'm going to be discussing Disco Demolition Night, July 12th, 1979, when a popular Chicago disc jockey told people that you get free admission to the game, a White Sox game, if you brought a disco record. And these were all collected into a huge pile, and then they were set on fire, and all hell broke loose. An absolutely amazing story. So let's take a final look at the chat. Anron says, if Halloween is one day in for kids, why do music and movie segments on it? Yes, touche. Well, everyone else was doing it. British American says, love the Billy Idol song of the same name. Yes, I will let a face. Metal Mike says, it's an interesting take on Halloween. I've always thought it was a remnant of pagan culture, like when Slavs throw a rag doll into the river every spring. Thank you for your kind words. Me too. Was Mackenzie King a necromancer? I suppose he believed himself to be. British American says, yes, indeed, he was a spiritualist, as they used to say. There was, when I lived just off Cook Street in Victoria, on Cook Street, there's one of these spiritualist churches, and I always used to pass it and then I'd feel a sort of shudder of dread. I don't know if any of you have read Muriel Sparks' novels, The Bachelors, which is about spiritualists. And I suppose my opinion is rather like hers, to the extent that it isn't silly. I find it frightening. Okay. A truly disgusting ad. I'll never eat a Twix again, says Anne Run. Sexy witches. A lot of the costumes you see, sexy nurse costume is very popular. I don't like the sexy nurse costume because I associate nurses with hospitals, and I associate hospitals with death. And okay, I think that's it. Thank you for your kind words, Don Willis. And Emma Kelly says, I think the disco records were blown up. Yes, I guess you're right. They were blown up, and the explosion was rather greater than what was suspected. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, which is greatly appreciated at all times, but is especially appreciated at this uncertain time in my life, particularly with regards to where I'm going to live. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.